Charlie, we all have the same aspirations, you know. You just have to identify and recognize, you know, what is peculiar, you know, to them in any one particular place or the other. That's the word, understanding, you know. Understanding their situation is half the work that needs to be done. But if I may comment on one aspect of the Somalia situation, the only complex thing I found about it was that when I had to withdraw, I had to draw back, okay? Because I couldn't stay there. And I couldn't stay there with them in Somalia, and I didn't think this was the kind of thing you would handle from outside, based in Kenya or Ethiopia. I thought you needed to be there. But the deployment of the number of tanks and soldiers, you know, to ensure my security was too much.
It was not conducive.
Correct. They needed to fight Al-Shabaab or whatever, to bring some sense of order and not be around me constantly. And the other side of it was, you don't send me into a situation like that and don't give me executive authority to give orders, you know, to troops on the ground.
Yeah, it's very difficult for you to implement them.
Correct, is what I mean. And and one side would be taking advantage of a situation like that, you know. You couldn't get things done appropriately, you know. I thought it would be best for the commanders-in-chief themselves, for the heads of state to actually deal with the political authorities on the ground and the military situation. Yes. How old are you?
30.
30.
Yes.
One of the Scandinavian prime ministers was shot and killed as he left. I don't know whether it was a movie theater and was going home. And that's because anytime the cloud, you know, of the apartheid situation was going to die down, Palmer would reignite it. Anytime it would die down, he would reignite it. And, you know, he paid the price for it. I'm trying to say that the world became engaged with Mandela. With the collapse of the bipolar world, changes that are happening globally, we're now left with two areas of some serious callous injustice: apartheid South Africa and the old Palestinian case. Apartheid South Africa is freed, Mandela is out. Why are we still seeing the sin of the Palestinian persecution?
So it's this failure to mobilize for that.
And I'm saying that, you know, that kind of situation is affecting the psyche of humanity. Yeah. And if we cannot deal with that kind of injustice, it will continue to percolate down and spark little pockets of injustice in places. Yeah. We need to restore the greenhouse cover of international political morality. It'll take the energy out of fanaticism, because part of it is directly related to the manner in which these Palestinians are being treated. It's unconscionable. And the silence of Africa shocks me, you know. And that's why I was saying that, you know, let us not keep dreaming of peace, the kind of peace, the unique kind of peace and stability. After all, they're Muslims. The unique kind of peace and stability we're asking for. It wouldn't happen if we're not heard voicing, even if nothing happens about it, we ought to be heard voicing, you know, our rejection of that kind of situation.
But if I can take you back to an earlier question, just as because it was the second part of it. As a former head of state, you're remarkably candid and very open and outspoken. And this is quite unusual, particularly for African former heads of state. Can you kind of glean us or tell us why that might be? Is there anything different about you, or is it that the situation doesn't allow for this?
I don't know. I mean, this is the way I've always been since I was a kid. This is my freedom. You know, I used to say that I didn't go out to want to be a president or a head of state. It was my pursuit of justice that put me in the seat of the presidency, you know. So coming off it has not changed me in any way. Not when the circumstances I can see are still unjust.
So
those that I can speak about, I will. Those that I can do something about, I will attempt to. Yeah.
And then just in kind of in wrapping up the interview as well, I just want to hear a little bit about, you know, Jerry Rawlings, the individual, you know, the husband, the father. How do you balance this with this persistent pursuit of justice and high office? I mean, how, to put it very bluntly, how do you relax? How do you unwind? How do you, you know, how do you attend to those other things that people tend to overlook in leaders that, you know, you're a human being too?
It's difficult to relax, you know, in this kind of situation. You know, the beauty of our situation when I left office, the economic and the social gradient, the pyramid, was very shallow. You know, the authority gradient. But it's become very steep now. Guamaka, before the collapse of the bipolar world, President Nyerere was passing through my country, I think to refuel, when I met him at the airport. And as we were walking from the aircraft to the lounge, he was asking me, what are we going to do with the imminent collapse of the Eastern Bloc? You know, because their socialist policies, you know, served as a counterbalance of a sort to the capitalist, whatever it is. I couldn't answer him because we really couldn't tell the way the world was going to be like. And, but I ventured a little suggestion that, well, the capitalists are Christians and they've been touting the values and the culture of democracy, and that's supposed to be at the core of their struggle, their fight. You know, so maybe the world might turn out to be a better place. The very Pope John Paul, who contributed to the collapse of the Eastern Bloc several years later, indicted the economic practices of the world with the words, the savagery, in his pastoral letter, the savagery of capitalism. That should tell you what became of the world after the collapse of the bipolar world. Yeah. Nepotism, the privatization of power, both economic and political, has been the order of the day. So, and further down, several years later, what did President Carter also say? He indicted America, he reproached America and said, you've lost your moral stature. And in a way, this is why the world was so expectant. This is why Mandela became such a powerful figure after him. The world, America, found, what's his name, Obama. And he suddenly looked like a man of, with political morality. And the world was so expectant of his leadership, really. Because what had happened earlier was just too much. Incidentally, in case you never saw this, and I'm saying it as a reminder, many years ago, Dick Cheney, who became Junior Bush's vice president, used to be the Minister for Defense. You know what he said on CNN? That America's interest supersedes, overrides issues of morality. I saw it. I said, my God. That may be the case, but to mouth it this way, and we'll teach our enemies to fear us and blah, 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 blah. I felt very sad, very sad. But That has been the reality. Obama did his bit to hold it in check with the practices of some of these multinational entities and corporations, but the point is that it has assumed a life of its own in the rest of the world. And Africa, with its weak situation, vulnerable situation, weak institutions, has become the most vulnerable place, you know? And we get up and of course, the media is doing its job, portraying all kinds of little activities going on. Africa's on the rise, etc. Of course, we can see all these buildings, all these structures, etc. But I'm saying that it looks like we're being assimilated, in the name of investment and these private entities, we will continue to hold the short end of the stick for some time. Can we unchain ourselves? Can we get out of that grip, that hold? It'll take people like Nkapa. Solid integrity and not materialistic, if you see what I mean. That is something that we've always respected about your country, Tanzania, under the leadership of President Nyerere. You've not allowed money, the monetization of your democracy, of your electoral process. But I believe you're in danger of having that now, like the rest of us. And that's not healthy, because you end up with a situation, right or wrong becomes politicized, as my daughter said a few weeks ago.
Just the two kind of final questions.
Yes.
You've mentioned Mandela and Nyerere and Carter. To a lot of us, these are heroes and figures that we look up to as leaders. Were there any leaders that you did or do still kind of look up to who influenced you? Or is it more just, you believe in something and you're going to go and see what happens?
I believe in something and I'll move on it. But as a young boy, my brother was 10 years older than me. So he worked in the resettlement sites. They were, with that same English guy I was talking about, they were building resettlement sites before the creation of the dam. And so during holidays, I would go with him into various parts of the country. And I mean, that's where I saw other living conditions, apart from those of us, what we're going through in the cities, the poverties. And that's what put me in direct contact with laborers, people. I mean, where you're looking at somebody who's about 54 years old, or 50-something years old, and yet when you look at his card, he's written 24, all of them 24 years, 24, 20, because they don't want to be sent home or being too old, And at an age of 13, 14, 15, you begin to think, So this sort of took me around the country to see things for myself.
What kind of advice would you give to aspiring and future leaders on the continent? As a kind of way to end the interview. Do you have any thoughts to share on this?
When I joined the Air Force, I was then with the communications squadron, and this also took me around the country, and landing on airstrips all over the country, all over the place. And it brought me into contact with the naked poverty people were going through, the hardships, the brown water people were drinking. Later, when I came into office, I said something that shocked our people a bit, but I thought it was necessary because we needed to get water across, basic water, clean water to people. And I said, the water we use to flush our urine in the toilets is cleaner than what people are drinking in the rural areas. This can't happen. This cannot go on. No electricity, etc. So sometimes we would take off from a little town and the rest of the place would be in complete darkness. Meanwhile, I know there are towns, villages all over. It became too clear, and yet that's where the wealth was coming from, the cocoa, etc. The capitals, our towns, were nothing more than parasitic entities. So I'm saying that these experiences were stimulating things in my head, that this injustice is just not good enough. You're watching people aging ahead of their time. There was a time, I love water. Most weekends, I would go to the riverside and stay there as a young officer. Sometimes, yeah, with my wife also, and our first daughter. Just as a way of escaping from the stress and the pain in the towns, in the city. You know, that period I was talking about, the urine time. One day, I would go diving for oysters with the villagers. And we used, you just use your breath. So that way, it gave the oysters a chance to also multiply and grow. But when we got to the other end of the bank, I was using some white guy's boat and sort of towed one of the villagers' canoe across the river. When we got to the place, you know, he spoke harshly to his wife. So I said, look, Kojo, you don't talk to her that way, your wife this way. You know, be a little more respectful. And then he's, what was he saying? That's not my wife, that's my mother. You know, alcohol and hardship to fend for his family had aged this man so badly. Needle and thread, I mean, all his daughters who would come diving with us, you know, they only had just that one piece of cloth, and that's what they'd have to hope it dries up in time for them to cover up in the night. Jesus Christ, man. So here you are trying to avoid, you know, these kind of scenes, and I come to run into another one. One day I was coming from his place, and there were two people on a canoe also diving for oysters, and a strapping, healthy-looking young man with his back to me had a rope around his waist, and the woman across did not. So I was saying, you know, how come the woman's diving without a rope around her waist and you have a rope around your waist? When the lady across, you know, said, because the man had his back to me, the lady said, that's my son, he's blind. A blind guy, you know, had learned how to swim and put a rope around his neck. Many years later, you know, when I came back, I went looking for them. The woman had died years ago, and the young man had died because he got caught up in one of the weeds. One of them can be pretty tight, got caught up in there. But you don't run into blind people doing things like that. That's a little risky, you know. But a blind man, you know, had learned how to fend for himself to survive. You know, we should talk about the issue of blind men someday, and I'll tell you how Stevie Wonder landed a plane without assistance.
No, I'd love to hear that story, but we are unfortunately at the very end. So just one final word, just in terms of the future and aspiring leaders in Africa, do you have any advice for them based on your experience in leadership?
I think so long as the vision, the noble objective is there, and you can identify some of the best in your country to constitute a team around you, what then becomes important is to stay dedicated to your principle, the maintenance of your integrity. Don't compromise on it. If you can do that, I think we'll go a long way.
Thank you very much, and I think with those words we'll end the interview. So I just want to thank you again for participating and for your candor. And to say to the audience, thank you for joining us, and for, well, hopefully see you again on another episode of Meet the Leader. Goodbye.
Thank you.